Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for February 27th. I would ask that as we begin, if you would all please silence your cell phones or devices so that we aren't hearing them during the meeting. We today have 15 items on our agenda. 13, 14, and 15 are informational or reports. I've been asked to pull everything except 2, 4, and 8. What that means is that all of the items except 2, 4, and 8 will be discussed individually. Is there anybody that wants anything else pulled, the choices being 2, 4, or 8? Seeing none, is there a consent motion for 2, 4, and 8?
Move approval.
Second.
Moved by Olson, second by Sipma. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Olson? Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Barney?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes. Item 1 is final payment for the extension for Broadway. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Olson.
Second.
Seconded by Wolski. Discussion. Wolski. Yes,
President
sir.
Janser, thank you. This is the 36th Avenue North project. Based on the staff memo, we had a $190,000 in liquidated damages. That's a project that didn't go as well as anybody wanted it to in the end. So I'm just going to add a very brief comment here. Is something we may want to consider moving forward in terms of keeping track of these projects. But I think if we kept a database of projects, of how they progressed, of how benchmarks were met, frankly, of how the contractor performed, it may be valuable for us in the future in terms of how we award bids for future work. Because it seems like most often we award bids based on the lowest amount. And I think there is the possibility for us to use other factors in terms of past performance, quality of work, things like that. But in order to justify using past factors, I think we need to have some tangible evidence. And I think a database that keeps track of contractor performance on issues like this on an ongoing basis might be a valuable tool. So I just wanted to offer that comment.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Wolski, I appreciate your comments. Want to let you know we're doing just that. In fact, you'll be hearing soon from the staff a recommendation to deny the lowest responsible bidder for this very purpose. So that will be presented later, but we are monitoring and tracking contractor performance so that we can ensure that these types of things do not occur in the future for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Alderman Padragula.
Just 2 comments. I think the particular contractor is moot because I think he's gone out of business, if I remember correctly, or at least one of those projects there. I very much like that. I think that's an important thing, and I'm glad to see the city moving forward with it. The only caveat I have, the only reservation I have is that it's going to take more in the way of resources. I see our staff being stretched very thin. This morning we had an hour-and-a-half meeting about various things, and one of the things that became evident as in a meeting yesterday with city administration is we don't have the technical resources in terms of staff, in terms of infrastructure, IT type stuff. And I very much agree with you, Josh, but I think we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to be willing to give them the resources they need to answer our questions and to monitor things and to, maintain the kind of oversight that we're asking increasingly for. So that's the only thing I'm a little hesitant about. I'm glad to see that happening, but we're going to have to beef that up. You and I have talked before about and I think others have mentioned concerns about the contracting process. And I'm not sure if we need a contracting officer, if we need to buy more attorney time to monitor things like that. But that's an area where I think we really need to improve. And unfortunately, to improve, I think we're going to have to invest more.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Barney?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes. Motion carried. Item number 3, award of the architectural services for the new multipurpose auditorium floor. Is there a motion?
Move 3.
Moved by Mayor Barney, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion? Mayor Barney.
I have a couple of questions if I could ask Scott. Mr. Collins, when I was reviewing this, something caught my attention that I'm hoping you can explain for me, and that is that we are hiring an architect for the laying of a floor. Can you explain to me why we need to have an architect for that?
Yeah, Alderman Janser, Mayor Barney, the reason we're going through this process, if you remember the Armory floor that we had all the issues with, we had an architect and engineering company do that floor. We didn't do the proper testing. I didn't feel comfortable speccing the job out and making sure all the proper testing was done. The last time we took core samples of the floor, after the problems had arisen, we had to send it to a company down in Minneapolis to have them analyzed and get that information back to us. So the architect is to spec it out and make sure the proper testing is done.
If I may continue.
Yes.
Are they the same floors, or is it the Armory where we had the problems and now this is the auditorium?
It's in the Armory auditorium, Mr. Mayor. I don't know what's underneath there, and I guess I wasn't comfortable looking at all the problems we had in the Armory floor to say that we won't have those same type of problems, and I'd rather do the testing prior to putting a new floor down and having the same problems occur again.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the, okay, seeing none. Thanks, Scott. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Okay. Motion carried. That brings us to item number 5. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
By Wolski, second by Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski?
President Janser, yeah, kind of a question just on the spring procedural for our big item pickup and a date for when this hazardous household waste and e-waste can be dropped off at various places. I know that comes up in April or May, and just want to start getting the word out.
President Janser, Alderman Wolski, you're correct. We want to make sure that we separate the bulk collection event, which will be, I think we have that set. It's in the middle of May sometime, and we want to separate that from the HHW event so that they're not happening concurrently. So they'll both be mid-May somewhere.
Okay. Brief continuation, President Janser. Just you know, the more often we can start saying those dates over the next few months on a regular basis, the better off I think we'll get in terms of people participating in those programs. So
Once we get the contractors on board, then we'll make sure that they have a free weekend in May, and then we can set everything from there. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Straight.
Thank you, President Janser. Jason, I have one request if it's possible. I'd be curious to know after this event how much money it costs the city to dispose of the e-waste. I think in the context of the larger landfill discussion moving forward, I appreciate that we host this event and that we have it, but I want to very much be able to convey back to citizens how much it costs to dispose of all the things that we think are pretty easy to dispose of and cheap. Clearly, there are other avenues that people could go to dispose of their e-waste, but by us having it, I want to be able to speak to the other end of this costs the city money. And if that's something that you can share with us down the road, I'd appreciate it.
President Janser, Alderman Straight. So, yeah, we collect that. We have that information. We'll have the poundage when everything is all said and done. Last year, the e-waste portion was somewhere in the neighborhood of about, $8,000 or $10,000. So not a big event, big amount, but some of these electronics are small, and people feel comfortable just throwing them in their garbage can, and they don't get segregated like they're supposed to. So this is an event. Generally, we see a lot of the CRT TVs, the big rear projection screen TVs, copiers, some really big items that come from some of the commercial businesses around. But there are some personal computers and things of that nature that come. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, call the roll, please.
Wolski?
Yes.
Barney?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Quadrigula?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Okay, motion carried. Item number 6, purchase of heavy-duty low-floor bus.
Move approval.
Moved by Olson,
Second.
second by Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, yeah, I have a few questions on this. I see Dan coming up. Great.
Go ahead.
I read in the memo, first of all, we're replacing a 28-person bus from 12 years ago that has a lot of miles on it, something like that. Are we replacing with another 28-person bus, or is it a larger bus? I'm just curious what equipment we're getting.
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Wolski, the new buses that we've been getting typically are a 31-passenger bus.
Okay. One of the questions I have, Dan, if I may continue, Mr. Janser, is when we're at our peak hours of usage on our busiest routes, are we filling buses up? Are we at that 31-person ridership, or what's our goal in terms of purchasing equipment versus balancing it against the ride demands?
Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, I'd have to do a little more digging on that, but I can tell you the buses very seldom are filled up. There's times of the day when there may be 1 or 2 people on a certain part of the route. But in the mornings and the afternoons, when we have a lot of ridership from the students, we actually have to add buses because one bus isn't enough for that route in the morning. So we add 2 additional buses in the morning and in the afternoon to service that. But like I said, it's very variable as to the ridership, but overall we have seen our overall ridership increase with the buses.
President Janser, if I may add just a kind of a brief comment here. I appreciate hearing that we're trying to balance the ridership with the equipment we have available. I think that's a pretty a good practice. And I guess my only comment from having used public transportation in a lot of different places around the country, around the world, is there are situations where at the peak times of the day, during the peak demand hours, the expectation is that sometimes people stand in these buses. I don't know if that's a practice we're using or not, or if everybody gets a seat, but that's the efficient way to use these resources and that expectation. So I'm just curious if that's being taken into consideration along the way, and obviously it sounds like we are trying to balance these loads, but driving empty seats around, expensive. So.
Okay, any further, Alderman Straight?
Thank you, President Janser. Dan, the low floor bus, this is ADA accessible, right?
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Straight, that's correct. What they are is instead of having the ramp system that folds out on the older buses, the bus is actually lower so that they're down to curb level for ADA accessible. And actually this bus that we're ordering has some new, I guess, ADA equipment in it for people in wheelchairs that's much quicker for securing their wheelchairs than the other buses. So it's, I guess, even more ADA friendly.
Alderman Straight?
Thank you, President Janser. Dan, how many of these now, the percentage, is our entire fleet moving in this direction? How many buses do we have that are low floor in relation to what's on the horizon?
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Straight, right now, I'm going to say 4 or 5 of our buses are the low floor type buses. The other ones have the ramps. The ones that we have out on the route 90% of the time are all the low floor type buses. So just like this one that's being replaced, it is a low floor. The others, like I said, are typically just used for mornings, like I said, when we have high ridership from school children or special events that we provide service for.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Dan. I used to ride the bus all the time, and we had these low floor buses, and I think it's a great thing for the city of Minot to present that we are working to help everyone in our community, and I appreciate that, and I look forward to riding them. So thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Any further discussion? Okay, we're ready to vote. Call the roll, please.
Olson? Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Barney?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes. Motion carried. Brings us to item number 7 on the agenda, approval of the CDBG NDR multifamily rehabilitation RFP. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Sitma,
Second.
seconded by Olson. Discussion.
President Chancellor, I had a few questions on this,
Alderman
likely
Wolski.
for Mr. Zakian. I think.
All right. John's.
John, our goal in this program is 70 LMI units. I think that's what I'm taking from the memo
For this RFP, yes.
for this RFP, in which those 70 encompass what needs to be 51% of an entire development. So what we're really talking about is about 138 units.
Yes.
That's likely to be developed.
That's the goal.
Okay. Can the market bear that right now? I know that's been an ongoing conversation in terms of
Well-
introducing, government-funded competition into a marketplace.
That's a good question. First off, this is rehab, not new.
Okay.
And it's being targeted for a reason to the downtown and contiguous areas. There has been a clear expression of interest among one or more apartment owners in the downtown that do need rehab. It's also, I know that there's been a lot of concern expressed by a lot of you about the need to pay attention to the downtown and try to increase attention and volume in the downtown. There's also an emphasis actually in the action plan that we try to revitalize and encourage growth in the downtown. That having been said, to your point, this is allowing up to 70. This is one of the differences between the original RFP that we sent out, which was much more restrictive, and our sense is it probably, because of its restrictions, discouraged some responses. The other key thing in this RFP, which is why we're allowing up to 70, is that the original one only was allowing for one award. This is allowing for multiple awards. So if we get 2, or if we're really lucky and we get 3 current apartment owners that have come in with really good proposals, and that we can easily meet our goals, and it's up to the 70, we will fund them. I think the other thing it's important to point out, and the reason we're doing it this way and capped it at 70, this does not use all the funds because there are going to be other opportunities. We are going to want to look at other ways to induce multifamily rehab and multifamily units. So even if at our best this comes in, we're still going to have somewhere around $11 million still to spend, and we're still well within a time frame to do that.
One follow-up, President Johnson. John, in this RFP, do we maintain the authority to perhaps award part of a proposal? So if somebody brings us a proposal for, 30 units and we think we want to do it for a smaller amount than 30, do we have the authority to do that if we reach that point?
We have that capability, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any further Alderman Straight?
President Janser, Mr. Zakian, is it, would this have to be utilized for an existing property that has had housing? We have a number of downtown merchants that have availability above, but if you've been, and at some point we'll hopefully take you to some of these places that are in desperate need, and they could very easily be apartments. Is that a possibility that can be threaded within this, or would that move to the future part of the agenda with the revolving loan
No,
fund?
that's a good question, and the first part of the answer is that there's no minimum. If someone comes in with a good proposal that's only for 5 units or 10 units, we can work with that. Again, remember, there's no cap on the number of awards we can make, so we have greater flexibility, and we have set no minimum because it's not necessary. I would say the only caveat is that, as I've said in other venues, we can't use HUD funds to override city code, but if someone can come in and they're either in a current mixed-use zone, or they could clearly demonstrate where, even though it may be a commercial zone now, it could be converted to a residential zone, then that would be fine, and we'd accept that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I see no further questions. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, please call the roll.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Quadrigula.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item number 9, the approval of CDBG DR allocation number 1, technical amendment number 14.
So moved.
Moved by Sitma.
Second.
Seconded by Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, this will probably tie together with some of the other issues, particularly number 10 too, but we're doing a little shift in allocation 1 here. I'm curious if the dollars that we have previously set aside to, I think, accomplish the completion of this Northern Tour project, were they in the budget somewhere else?
Mr. Zakian, you want to clarify that?
I can try to answer this, and if I can't, then either the finance director or public works director, but I think I can answer it. This was a multi-phase project, and when it was originally contemplated, we, the city, put in our action plan, which remember was 5 years ago now, funding only for the first phase because that was felt to be the most important and critical one. That has now been completed. There is a modest there is some balance left over because of what it was an estimate. There's about $440,000. We have now gotten to the final phase, and we do have available funds, and this could be a choice, either incurring city costs, or since this is a final piece of an already approved, we can move some money around and cover that final phase. This will complete a major project. And so since we had that funding available, it kind of eases the pressure off of the city. I was fine and recommended that we reallocate the funds. For transparency, we had originally estimated we were going to use a certain amount of funds for the landfill project. It turns out we did not need anywhere near that amount out of the allocation 1. So what we're actually doing, which is why this is the technical amendment, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with you, but we're simply moving funds within the infrastructure allocation of budget. We're just moving it from one project to another, already approved. So it's just a simple shift of the available funds. The funds we're moving, those projects have closed out.
Okay. President Janser, a brief continuation here, and it may be for you, John, but I believe this project was in our budget last fall and has been planned for this year. I guess I'm curious, if we hadn't done this, did we budget for this somewhere else? Out of what fund would we have done this? Were we not taking this course, or we've been planning to do this all along?
John? Or
maybe
Dan? Okay.
I could give you an answer, but it'd probably be,
sure.
Dan could probably give you a better answer.
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Wolski, the initial funding shown for this was some of the CDBG that was originally shown for the sewer project, and then to bond for water and sewer bonds for the remaining cost of the project.
Okay, so we're saving ourselves the incurrence of some debt here.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Zakian on this topic? All right, seeing none, thank you, John. Any further discussion? Apparently not, so let's vote. Call a roll, please, Kelly.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson, yes. Padragula.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item number 10 is the CDBG DR allocation number 1, substantial amendment number 15.
So moved.
Moved by Sitma.
Second.
Second by Padragula. Discussion. Alderman Padragula.
Yes, I just wanted to comment and compliment City Staff, particularly Mr. Zakian, on the flexibility that we're showing in terms of moving these funds around. I know this is not a technical but a substantive amendment, and I'm particularly pleased, again, with our flexibility. It's really dismaying when I read through the forms from the federal government. I think it was like 156 pages or something. My goodness, I should take an aspirin before I do that. But in contrast to the federal government, which seems very, very extraordinarily rigid, we're being flexible. And I think it's particularly important to me because we're going to be using some of this money to deal with the zombie homes. And that's something that's concerned me, that's annoyed me, that's saddened me ever since the flood. And it's very good to see us moving to deal with this problem in a more effective and prompt manner. For me, that's always been a priority, and it's frankly, I think, been a kick in the teeth to people who, in the flood areas, have put a great deal of effort and money into restoring their homes to have these zombie homes present. I understand that there are some that will be removed with the flood project, with the flood improvement, flood control projects. We're going to have to use a program here and a program there to deal with them. But I'm really pleased. I'm really impressed that we're going to be doing something. My kind of back of the envelope calculation is one of these homes is $50,000 or so at most. And if we're looking at what $800,000, that should allow us to make a significant impact in that inventory. So I'm really, really, really pleased that we're going to be doing this. I just wanted to say that.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Chairman Janser. I guess to piggyback on Alderman Padragula's point, having met with some of the residents that live next to these properties, I would hope that City Manager Barry and how we move forward with this, that when we acquire these properties, I hope that we could bundle many of them working with a contractor for the demolition cost, because it's one cost for the acquisition, but it's going to be a whole nother cost in the removal of them, and that's where I feel like this can get really costly. So I'm excited about it. I'm very excited about it, and I hope that we use the fantastic skills of Mr. Derek Hackett and really promote this to the community, that we showcase that we're solving this problem. I'm looking at Alderman Sitma right now, and I know this is near and dear to his heart, as many of us that were flooded, and I'm excited about it. So I'm thankful, and I really hope that we can be as smart as we can to spend as much of the money and get as many of them gone as possible. So thank you, Chairman Janser.
Okay. Any further discussion? Alderman Wolski.
Chairman Janser, a comment here. I echo all those comments. I support and I'm going to support this amendment today. Just a couple things that I kind of want to touch on. We're with this issue and with the last issue, we are reprioritizing some very significant resources, upwards of $3 million. And fundamentally, I agree with the direction that staff is taking us here. But sometimes it's hard to get a sense of how we should be prioritizing resources when we don't have alternative options in front of us. And so I think we have found these some projects here that do rise to the top in terms of priorities, but I think also included in the first and second allocation were the need to use dollars for acquisitions, for buyouts. That's another priority that I think is significant on the city's radar, and we are, we've got a lot of work to do on that front. And so I think as we talk about these reprioritizations moving forward, I would like to see some comparison. I don't quite know how to ask for that or how easy that is to put together, but again, when we choose to do this, we're choosing not to do something else, and I'm not seeing what those other things that we're not choosing to do are. So I just kind of wanted to share that thought. John, it looks like you'd like to share some thoughts there.
Mr. Zakian.
President Janser, Alderman Wolski. Actually, before I do that, I want to further amplify a point that Alderman Straight made. I didn't highlight it, but we were able to move additional funds into demolition. So the $800,000 is for acquisition on the zombie homes, but there's around $150,000 as a starting point that's going to be included in the substantial amendment for demolitions. And we are thinking along the line. City manager and I have already talked about this, and we've already thought about along the lines you suggested. Now to your point, and I don't want to, again, get too deep in the weeds, but I appreciate what you're saying, and we are consciously on the CDBG disaster recovery and NDR sides trying to really begin to do that. In this particular case, our hands were tied, which is why, well, these are three critical needs. We're staying within the scope of the original action plan, which HUD always likes to say. I do not expect pushback on this. But for instance, in the acquisitions, allocation one was only a voluntary acquisition program. So unfortunately, because the city at the time, and again, this is 5 years ago, elected to follow that route, we can't use that in the buyout. So when I was looking at priorities, that clearly still is a priority and will continue to be a priority. And we may be able, at some point in time, not now, shift more funds in the NDR. But what I was looking at is I've been listening to your concerns, and I've also been listening to community concerns. And you're right, Alderman Wolski. These kind of elevated to the top. It's the most seamless way to use this available funds, but we will continue to be really scrutinizing going forward with all of it. So you make a good point.
Alderman Straight.
President Janser, I guess, for the record and for some transparency, I had a conversation with Mr. Zakian yesterday about, to Alderman Wolski's point, I appreciate, Josh, you focusing on the money that we are going to spend with these two amendments. I'm very concerned about, we have a considerable amount of money that's still needed for acquisitions in the first three phases. And I'm also well aware that NDR money is going to go away by 2021, 2022. I live on the east side of Minot, and I think for the folks over there, we're going to need a considerable amount of money for buyouts for future phases. And I know we talk about the importance of getting 65% of folks out of harm's way for the first four phases of flood protection. But my concern is, let's say at a minimum, maybe right now we owe somewhere between 10 and 12, we need 10 or 12 more million for acquisitions out of the first three phases of flood protection. We haven't even heard an estimate of what's going to be necessary for the east side of Minot. And I'm going to say at a minimum, based on initial conversations I've had, we're probably at 20 million up. So the money's going to go away. And where, to your point, Alderman Wolski, how are we prioritizing going forward? My concern is that the appetite is going to go away. And those of us on the east side of Minot are going to be left thinking, great. So I'm concerned as much as everyone else. And I hope that at some point we're going to start talking about how we're going to prioritize some of that, because it has to be also part of the conversation of flood protection. We know NDR, we can't spend the money on flood protection, but if we can get to a point, we've heard from city staff that we don't want to have, what is the term? Technical amendments. I think at some point we might want to use our senators, Heitkamp and Hoeven, and to possibly cherry pick an idea of running one through the federal government, through one of their offices, for a substantial amendment to maybe utilize some of the NDR funds for acquisitions. Because the idea is that we've acquired the funds to build a more resilient community. How are we ever going to do that if we don't get folks out of harm's way? And so I guess I propose it to you all today because I want you to think about it, because I think it's important for the longevity of the community. We can debate all we want whether we need some of these categories for NDR funds, but the real importance is getting folks out of harm's way, building the flood protection that we need, and how are we going to do it? So I appreciate, John, you kind of hearing me out on that, because it's an emotional issue for many, but I wanted to state it today. So thank you, Chairman Jansen.
If I could, Alderman Street, you're on the right track. The technical term is that there are certain things we can't do through a substantial amendment that will require a statutory amendment or regulatory amendment by HUD, and that's where it might be at some point better to elevate it. I also do want to point out that a number of you have been having these conversations with me, and I'm acutely aware of it. And you've heard me say this before, but to the best extent possible, and this explains why I've become much more aggressive in controlling demolition costs, I apologize, that's my phone. I'm bad, I didn't listen to you. What I'm trying to do to the limit possible inside the NDR is make as much of the money as possible available for acquisitions. I mean, that's also why we become more aggressive, or at least we're trying to be more aggressive, in choosing between demolition and auctioning. We're trying to get higher prices on the auctions by doing the minimum bid requirements. Again, any of that money that comes in, we can pour back into acquisitions. Sure. But again, for transparency, because I appreciate this, we can only go so far. And a point will be reached sooner rather than later where there'll have to be a really serious discussion about what we do beyond NDR. Sure. Yes.
Okay. Alderman Wolke, you have something else?
Yeah, just a brief follow-up on all of that, John. In terms of the substantial amendment to the $74.3 million, it's been probably 8 or 9 months since I asked you if you have you'd been here about 2 months. I think this is June of last summer. If you had a sense of where we are in terms of should we be seeking a substantial amendment? Should we get to work on that process? And I know, based on comments you've made in the past, there is risk associated. There's a lot of things to factor into whether that's the right choice or not. But as I continue to look at the NDR program and our prioritization, and then in particular, frankly, the needs of the community, and with regards to a lot of how those resources are focused in the application and how we're trying to direct them, I think that's something we need to look really seriously at in terms of trying to really make sure those resources do the best we can for us. So I just wanted to share that.
Sure. President Chancellor Alderman Wolski. It is a living document. You've heard me say that before. And again, what was projected 3 years ago has clearly changed. I can tell you that as of now, none of the 13 NDR recipients have done a substantial amendment. That's not to say we can't be the first, but there is no precedent. If you were to ask me for a projection, I would say that we would be at a defensible position because we really will have to defend when we do a substantial amendment, and I do envision it happening either the latter part of this year or the early part of 2019.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Straight.
I guess just one final point, John, on that. I can't see of a better reason for us to go to the federal government, possibly through Senator Hoeven's office, than, hey, we have survived a disaster. We're trying to get people out of harm's way now. You can either help us now with the funds that we already have, or we can come to you later through FEMA and ask for more money. And I think at some point we have to really seriously consider this. And so I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, John. Any further discussion? All right, let's vote on the motion. Call the roll.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried. That brings us to item number 11. And this item, we had a couple of pieces of correspondence, one from Mr. Feist and another one from Silverleaf. So Mr. Zakian didn't go too far. That's good because I think the request in these letters was to hold this item rather than move it forward. John, do you have a comment or recommendation regarding those requests?
I would concur with that. This will fall under HUD standard procedures. Even though neither communication formally asked for an appeal, we can easily construe them as both requesting an appeal. So I would recommend that you simply table this. You are the appeal in this process. Very simply, what they have the right to do is certainly disagree with our recommendation. What we would ask them to do in the next 30 days is to provide us with a detailed breakdown within the RFP and within what they provided us, why they disagree with our findings that they didn't meet all of the requirements. And then we can certainly bring this back to the council for consideration. I would also just want to point out that, and I had pointed out this in the beginning, we do not, under any circumstances, are we obligated to make an award under this RFP, and that was made clear in the beginning. But again, they certainly have the right to respond to our findings, and I would recommend that we simply table it. I will give them both notification of the 30-day period, and we can come back to this ideally at the next committee of the whole meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zakian. Alderman Sitma.
I would move to table the item.
Okay, it's moved to table.
Second.
Second by Olson. Discussion. Call the roll.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson, yes, Padragula.
Yes.
Okay, motion to table carries. Thank you, one and all. Item number 12, the neighbor next door lot sale program.
So moved.
Moved by Sitma,
Second.
seconded by Straight. Discussion.
President
Alderman
Chancellor,
Wolski.
I requested this be pulled for a couple of reasons. I'm going to try and find my notes here. But first comment, I'm glad to see that we're doing something with these lots. There, I think, a number of them that have been a concern for neighbors and neighborhoods in terms of what's going to happen with them, and getting them back into the hands of an adjacent property owner seems like maybe a best case scenario overall. The question that very quickly comes to mind is, why did we acquire them in the first place? If they're outside the footprint. I know there's a lot of history in that question. There was one of these properties that I actually wrote about several years ago on the Minot Voice, and I couldn't really find an answer then as to why we had acquired it, other than we had a program that made it acquirable. So I'm just going to add that comment. John, if you want to speak to any of that, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to add one following comment on all of this. It was very shortly, maybe even during the high water of 2011, that a document out of Grand Forks circulated. And I think it was kind of related to the lessons they had learned as a result of going through the 1997 flood. Alderman Straight, correct me if I'm wrong on that one. And the many years recovery afterwards, and the steps the community should take. I know we're all, particularly staff, are doing an enormous amount of work on lots of different initiatives right now. But as we move forward, I think the acquisition of some of these homes maybe was a mistake. We maybe shouldn't have been using resources to acquire homes outside of footprints that in some cases weren't blighted, that had been restored and then were tore down. And so I think it's going to be appropriate for us to try and think about how to bring a lot of these lessons together so that we can capture them and remember them in the future when we need them, and have them available to other communities too.
Mr. Zakian, do you wish to comment?
Yes.
Okay.
President Janser, Alderman Wolski. Goes without saying, I wasn't here when all this took place. From what I can understand, based on the sources of the funds, some of these, all of these properties were acquired because they were identified, as best I can tell, identified as kind of like zombie homes. Some of them were zombie homes. Some of them appeared to be leaning that way, no pun intended. For some of them, they were originally identified as potential for partners with nonprofit corporations to build low and moderate income single-family homes. All I can say, and again, remember, this is the 2014-15 period when some of the rules were still being formulated. This city was still getting up to speed on what the rules were. The biggest challenge with lots like this, which is why ultimately I moved forward with this program, because a combination of some neighbors have already inquired about this, but it really is the only alternative we have right now. Any property within the FEMA 100-year floodplain, new building, new housing, will be subject to flood insurance. Any new housing within the 100-year floodplain that incurs or uses any form of federal funds, which is likely what would have to happen to induce this housing, would have to be elevated 1 foot above the flood level. Those two factors alone would drive out above the low and moderate income home ownership cost that's now allowed inside the state of North Dakota. I can't speak to how far this had been pursued at the time, but certainly as a lesson learned going forward. I mean, clearly we're not doing this anymore. But there were certain extenuating circumstances like that that really did not make any other use for this property feasible. And that's why I brought this before you today as being the most reasonable way to turn this back to those neighborhoods, assure its maintenance, and get the liability off of the city.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Sitma.
Thank you. Mr. President, just a short comment here, and this is relating back to tying 12 and number 10 together on this. It really does address both issues, seeing as Mr. Zakian had alluded to, many neighbors that have contacted me or have contacted some of us not only want to get rid of the blighted homes, the zombie homes, but would be more than gracious to buy a portion or all of the lot that's next to them. That also alleviates the problem of the city having to take care of those lots in the future. So I more than support this, more than support number 10, and happy to see that we're able to find an avenue to take care of the problem and to essentially get it back onto a usable tax roll for the city too.
Alderman Patergula.
I wanted to echo what Alderman Sitma said. I think this is the proverbial win-win situation. It gets them off the city's back, if you will. It gives the residents in the neighborhoods more of a chance to further improve their properties. And you're right, these are not going to be buildable kinds of things going forward. It's just not realistic. So I think this is an excellent, excellent option.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Sitma,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Barney,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion carried. That brings us to item number 13, which is a discussion of the Main Street Initiative Summit. Mayor Barney.
Thank you, Mr. Janser. I had a few notes from that event that I'm willing to share. It was very interesting. It was interesting to listen from the state's perspective. There were a number of representatives from all the state departments in attendance. There was really no program available from the state to help foster this. But we did come away with some ideas, or I came away. I can't speak for the whole group. I came away with some ideas. The first thing I want to mention is that I think that Minot is uniquely situated to take advantage of this initiative. And the reason why I say that is because we have an advantage that other communities don't have, and that we have our infrastructure needs already taken care of. In our downtown, we have brand new streets. We have brand new sewers. We have brand new storm sewer. We have brand new water. We have brand new sidewalks, and we have brand new lighting. Those are the bones for a healthy downtown. And I think that the responsibility for the marketing and creating the buzz for the downtown is going to fall squarely on the shoulders of the people that live, work, play, and have stores downtown. So to that end, I'm scheduled to speak to the Downtown Business and Professional Association at their April meeting. I wanted to go in March, but scheduling conflicts didn't allow for that. So I'm scheduled to talk to them in some detail on what we are, or what I am looking at in terms of what we should be doing downtown. A couple of interesting statistics. One was that a downtown should have programming for 250 events a year. There doesn't have to be 250 individual different events, but something going on downtown, or some kind of activity, some kind of event, whether it's a farmer's market or like what they did last week with the cocoa and coffee tour, things like that going on a regular scheduled basis. The other thing that was interesting is that they were, one of the primary speakers was adamant that downtown merchants for a vibrant downtown need to be open past 6 p.m. in the evening. And I realize that can be a burden on some businesses, but I think that if enough of them are doing it, enough people are aware of it, you can kind of create critical mass and really start generating downtown activity in the evenings. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I took away from our meetings, and planning on sharing that with the people that are in the driver's seat downtown. That's all I got.
Alderman Potter-Gula.
Just a follow-up question. I've been impressed, quite frankly, with the governor's position in this conference. I wish I'd had the chance to go. What will the state be offering in terms of assistance? I mean, there obviously were big name speakers, if you will, and you've mentioned a couple ideas which I think are very, very interesting and very specific. To what extent is what's the state's picture on this? What's their role going to be, if any? Do you know?
Mayor Barney?
Yeah.
Cheerleading? I don't think they've got a specific program, but I think they were there to get people the information that that we needed to have to begin these conversations here locally. And so cheerleading is a very flippant remark, and it doesn't speak to, I think, the quality of the summit and the information that was delivered to us. But I didn't see the bones of a specific program that we're going to be able to access. I don't think there is a specific initiative, but I think all the departments at the state seem to be on board to some degree with the governor's initiative. And so if there's help that we need, if there are ideas that we have in which the state can assist us, I think the conversation is there I think they're waiting to have those conversations. That's the sense I got from it, I guess.
Alderman Sitma.
Thank you, President Janser. And one of the other pieces that really kind of drove home about the Main Street initiative was more of the why as well. And it wasn't just to have a vibrant downtown and a vibrant core, but also with the value of the investment that already sits there. As the mayor had indicated, we have an entire infrastructure, the bedrock, the foundation that's already there. But to the other end of the equation is the value and the cost of expansion, and putting the actual pencil down to paper and showing really what the cost of ever expanding communities are relates directly back to the higher property taxes that everybody is paying across the state. And I really think more of that's going to come out here over the next 6 to 12 months, I think, throughout communities in North Dakota, as we really take a look at the value that we already have. If you take the value of 1 acre of downtown versus the acre of an expansion, they are completely different, and they pencil out entirely different when it comes to paying for infrastructure. So that was the reasoning behind why a strong downtown, a solid core is so important, because that is a tremendous value not only to the community in terms of the social life and the quality of life, but also to the value of those property taxes that funds the entire machine. So it's an appreciative point that came out of there was the why.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, President Janser. I guess my takeaway, I went into it kind of with an interest of how to help me with my piece of involvement with the downtown gathering place and the site that we've chosen and how that concept, you know, how we can make that as fantastic as a destination that can drive people to downtown Minot. And so I spoke with the keynote speaker, Roger Brooks, after his Tuesday talk, and I just wanted to ask him directly what, when we have an opportunity like this, what are also our pitfalls to be aware of kind of going into it? And he said, Shannon, the one thing you have to do simultaneously, you're going to spend all this time talking about the concept, talking about what you want to see, how great that's going to be. You have to be simultaneously building the business plan and who's going to be running this site. So to Mayor Barney's point, I think that's the conversation that we also need to keep in mind when we talk about the gathering place. We have to be parallel working with Mr. Merritt and the Parks, because that was an initial consideration. They might manage this space. How are we going to create a dynamic organization that's going to run, oversee, and make this space an attraction to Minot? And so with that, I wanted to tease out one idea to you, and I spoke with Mr. Zakian about this yesterday. We're going to get together March 12th to discuss the IEDC monies. We all got together in the fall. I see Stephanie's here from MADC. The chamber folks were there. We all know that we need to get back together in the room and have discussions about how we can work better together and move some things forward. And I think part of Mayor Barney meeting with the downtown PA, we need to have a conversation of how we can help support that organization moving forward, because some of us took the opportunity a couple months ago and applied to host the downtown conference. And the letter, I wrote a letter of support with some other folks, and the letter we received back saying, we're not going to award this to you is partly because we don't have full-time staff on a downtown professional and business association. So how can we help elevate a group of very busy business owners to have a conversation that can benefit us by drawing people into downtown? And so I hope in part of that conversation with IEDC, those $200,000 we're going to spend going forward, how can we use those funds to talk about what we need, how we can work better together? I think that's critical. And I have to say, since Jill's in the audience, and to City Manager Barry, I made the mistake yesterday, Mayor Barney. I CC'd 3 other council members and an email to Mr. Barry about downtown seating. And so I violated the open meeting laws. I apologize to everybody in the audience. I will print off that email. But the email was about, last year we passed an ordinance to allow downtown bars, restaurants to create outdoor seating. And there were some specs associated with that. But what we haven't settled on is a fee structure. So my email was, we need to decide on a fee structure for this outdoor seating so we can take one tangible piece forward going into the summer that can help draw people into downtown. So that's something we have to talk about to get going relatively soon. And then I'm excited to say, I met with a group of folks last week from the Parks, Minot State, and a couple other people in town, and we're working on developing a bike share concept, partly to meet the need of some students from Minot State that obviously have transportation needs, and we're just kind of initially getting that together, but that's going to be a focal point of coming into downtown as well. And I'm excited to kind of talk about it publicly because I want people to keep checking in, because I think there are a lot of us that want to make it happen. So that's my 2 cents on the downtown conference.
Okay. Alderman Wolski, you have something further?
Sure, President Janser, I'll share a couple things. One, to add to the mayor's comment about after 6 o'clock sales, I think the statistic we heard was that 70% of all retail sales take place after 6 p.m. And so as we work with our downtown merchants and try and deliver them some of this knowledge, some of this support, I think there are, one of the things that immediately jumped out at me down there was the fact that The folks who were able to attend that couple-day conference there were a few of us as elected officials there. We had a few city staff members. We had some folks from MADC. We had a good collection of Minot representation down there on many fronts. But what we didn't have a lot of down there were the business owners, were the merchants, were the people who were going to have to implement a lot of these ideas. And so one of the things that immediately jumped out to me is that may be helpful is maybe it's possible for us to dedicate some resources and bring some of this expertise to town. So those folks who are already, running a shop 6 days a week have the opportunity to hear from and learn from some of these individuals. There was just a wealth of knowledge that I think we have a challenge in terms of getting that knowledge out to everybody who needs to be a part of this effort, because it isn't something we're going to be able to do alone. I think the collaborative approach is required. A couple other thoughts. One of the things that I heard in a couple of the keynotes was the need to focus on some type of anchor attraction. In some cases that was a high traffic retail store. In some cases it was a grocery store or some other type of destination. I think that becomes sort of a more significant challenge for Minot in particular as we approach a future where Trinity will be vacating a lot of property downtown. And so a lot of trips that are taking place down there now are going to be going a different direction, and we're going to have some redevelopment challenges to deal with. And so, I think we're going to need to continue fostering that relationship with the folks at Trinity. And I know there have been a lot of regular meetings, if not monthly meetings, with those folks to stay up to date on this. But, I think this isn't something that can be done or accomplished in a meeting like this. This is going to be an ongoing process in terms of plotting the path forward, I guess. So.
Thank you. I'm glad that we had representatives at this meeting. When I and some other folks met with the governor shortly after he was elected, we had about 2 hours with him, and about 45 minutes of that time he spent talking about the Main Street Initiative. The mayor would remember that. I think just the ideas that have been generated conceptually from the exposure that you all have had, I think is good for us. And as we go forward to keep working on a number of these potential moves and thought processes, I think will be real good. So thank you for the discussion, and we'll continue to work at this. Moving on then to item 14. This is a discussion about a student representative at council. So,
President Johnson.
Alderman Wolski.
I added this agenda item, and I did so in part because I think it tied partially to some of the things we learned at the Main Street Summit, which was we have to be intentional about engaging our younger people. They're looking at a very different future in terms of the way they work and live than the generations that have come before them. And so as an idea, as a concept to simply start a discussion, I don't have a motion here. There's no agenda. It just occurred to me that being intentional about inviting perhaps a representative from Minot State or from one of the local high schools to become more involved in the process and the conversations that are taking place in this room about the future of this community might be worthwhile. And so like I said, I have no agenda here. I don't have a motion. I simply wanted to introduce the idea of inviting some younger involvement into this process with us.
Okay. Alderman Potter-Gula.
I think that's a good idea. I think couple thoughts. The first thought is to systematically invite the representatives of the media from the high schools and the college to come as a representative of their organizations. I know Boy Scouts typically come. The mayor is always very welcoming toward them. I mean, that's one obvious way, and to kind of encourage them, use the media as a representative of those publics, of those constituencies. The other thing that comes to mind is that several of us have participated in programs for international visitors, panel discussions at the college typically, for people who are coming from all over the world to learn about America. And I'm wondering if there's a way we could kind of use that as a model. For example, I know that civics, political science classes like that are taught at high schools and the college. And if we maybe could reach out to the administrators, to the leaders of those organizations and say, hey, you know, we have a bunch of people here who are active in government. We're a resource. I remember many years ago I was asked on a yearly basis to come into the high school to talk about psychology at one of their psychology classes. What does a practicing psychologist do? It was a lot of fun, and the students learned something. And, you know, I think that might be one way to kind of build what the city does and city government into the curricula at these organizations. You know, I'm not much of a fan, I don't think that's what you're proposing, of having a seat where we have a student seat. But, you know, I think there are ways of building on what we've already been doing. And I think in the long run, it's very important to, you know, have a ladder for people to become involved in government and to learn what's happening. And, you know, like we've said before, maybe they can bug their parents to do more recycling and things like that. But I think there are already educational efforts that we're engaged in informally and individually that maybe we can formalize, maybe we can kind of build into what we do. Anyways, those are just my thoughts on it.
Mayor Barney.
Thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Following up with Alderman Padragula just briefly, I know that in where I work in the College of Business at Minot State, several of the professors have requirements that their students attend 10 to 15 different public events, and I often see them out in the audience during our meetings to get them involved and understand exactly what it is we do. So I know that some of the colleges at the university are doing exactly that. And also I've extended invitations to the Student Government Association at Minot State University, although I've not seen them here, but I know that they're busy people. I mean, they're going to school. A lot of them are working. They're involved with student government. I also have had a lot of involvement from the addiction studies students at Minot State University. They've been attending a lot of our subcommittee meetings. They've been to some of our larger committee meetings, and I met with 4 of them last week. Making sure I'm not, last Wednesday, to talking about what we're doing with addiction within Minot, and we spent hour and a half talking about that. And so I know that they're actively involved and they're participating at a very active level. But I concur with Alderman Padragula. I don't think we're looking to have them seated up here, but if we can get them involved with what we're doing out in the community, I welcome that. I encourage that. At one point, I had through Dr. Vollmer, I would have a meeting, I forgot how often it was, but periodic, with student leaders at the Magic City campus, and talking about government, talking about the issues in the city, talking about what you do as mayor. But that kind of fell off, as often happens. They get busy and the interest wanes, and that's, because they are busy.
Alderman Sitma.
Thank you, President Janser. Perhaps that might be a decent time where City Manager Barry might be able to block off a small portion of time during, let's say, a retreat that is coming up, where we can actively formulate a nice path forward for engagement on that, as I'm sure he already has some ideas of his own. But that might be a great opportunity to put that into motion.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. President. Alderman Sitma, I do want to just let you know I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that are just along the lines that you've mentioned. We have developed a community engagement subcommittee inside the city and are studying this issue with the intent of developing a comprehensive community engagement strategy for the city, of which we would have a youth component. I've already reached out to the school district and had some preliminary conversations about what that might look like at different age levels. And in addition, we were talking with other members of the community as what it would look like to have adult engagement as well. So it would be very early, I think, to have that conversation for us, at least at this point at the retreat. So I do think that's an appropriate venue to have that conversation. We just won't be prepared for it. So if you'll allow me some time to work on further developing concepts and ideas so that we can have a more educated and informed discussion, I'd be happy to bring that back to you at another time.
Mayor Barney.
I just want to follow up on something that Alderman Sitma said, and that is we don't have to wait for a blessing from the city to reach out to these organizations and communities. I mean, I'm often asked, even before I was mayor, often asked to come speak at Boy Scout troops, talk about citizenship or government. I'm speaking to a group of nursing students next week about healthcare, public health within the community, focusing on opioids. There's lots of opportunities out there, and if you just reach out a little bit to some of these organizations, they're going to be thrilled to death. And frankly, I'd really appreciate some of the pressure being taken off. So if you want to do that, I mean, don't wait for the city to do it for you. Go out there and do it on your own.
Well said. Alderman Olson.
As the resident teacher on this council, I would certainly agree with you. Teachers are always looking for opportunities for experts in different fields to come into their classrooms. And so knowing now that we can make ourselves available, I think that we will have some requests.
Alderman Straight.
I'd like to piggyback on Mayor Barney's comment that last week Alderman Walski and I were invited to participate in the International Mother Language Day at Minot State. And I had an opportunity to speak at that, and I was struck at the sheer number of kids there from the Job Corps. And we've been invited, I know everybody up here has attended a Job Corps luncheon, and but I think, I guess I'm going to only speak for myself, that on some of the things that I feel like I'm working on, I have to make that first step back to some of those groups. But I think going forward, however we can try to engage on the library board, the building blocks that came out, you know, there were some definite things there that seemed to matter to the younger generation, and I think maybe that's the starting point of the conversation of how we can engage them on recreation and, you know, better restaurants and more love. So I think that's important. So.
All right. Good thoughts and some opportunity for action there. And we'll look forward to further pieces of the community engagement effort. All right. Good discussion. That brings us to item 15, which is the airport activities. There was a written report. Are there any, while we're here, are there any questions or anything for the airport director based on that? Seeing none, that brings us to the end of our agenda.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Olson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.